Well, good evening, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome. It's lovely to see you all here. My name is Giles Goddard, and I'm going to do the housekeeping, but then I might appear in a few minutes in another capacity. So just to let you know that we haven't planned any fire practices, so if the fire alarm goes off, the exit is there or diagonally across the lobby at the back. I think that's all I need to say, except that the bar will be open afterwards, and there will also be books on sale afterwards, so don't feel you've got to rush off. We've also got some crisps and things, so if you need to fill your stomach a bit, hopefully you can do that too. And we are very, very, very honoured indeed to have Julie Siddiqi and Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg here as our co-interlocutors. I'm really delighted. They're both good friends of mine and people for whom I have a huge amount of respect. And Julie is going to be chairing, so I'm going to hand over to you now. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you so much, Giles. Is it loud enough? Yeah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I begin in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Thank you so much for having us in this beautiful space. I was just saying to Rabbi Jonathan that there's many places in the world where this kind of thing isn't possible ever, and particularly at the moment it feels challenging. And so I feel quite moved, really, actually, and grateful to be here. And I never take these things for granted. And I also know that in a room like this of good people who've made an effort to come, we kind of weave a web of goodness, and we never quite know what that's going to do it anyway. And whoever is here, for me, they're the important people. So thank you sincerely for coming to something on a very windy autumn, September, gone back to school day. And, I'm really, really looking forward to these conversations. When we were thinking about what to do today, and, honestly, if you've read either of these books, I've read one and I'm reading the other, so much comes up, and there's so many things we could talk about. So we're going to sort of have a conversation and dive into some of the themes and reasons why these wonderful people wrote these wonderful books. But we really wanted to honour the challenges that are happening in the world. And it feels very difficult to navigate at times. I think for me, as somebody who's been in the, interfaith space for the last 20 years or so, this past year has been the most difficult I've ever seen in terms of the impact it's had on people. And there's lots of, different aspects to that, of course, and then, more close to home recently with the riots and the impact that's had, the fear that I hear from my Jewish friends, the unease that I hear from others, the confusion. And I would say that we're all collectively kind of bringing all of that with us today. And so we felt that it would be good for us to just sit in silence for a minute or so, just to honour that in each other, and just so that we're all aware of our own messiness and our beauty and complexities. I often talk about the Holy Land, to that part of the world. Sometimes it doesn't always feel that holy, but within all its beautiful messiness, and I think that we're all kind of carrying all of that in a space like this today also. So if we can just sit together in silence for a minute or so and just honour what we're all holding, and appreciate each other for making this effort to be here today. Thank you. So, the way this is going to work is that we are going to hear from each of our wonderful authors here a bit about each of the processes of writing their books, and then we'll have a kind of conversation between us all. And then the idea is that after about 45 minutes or so, we'll bring all of you in to the conversation. So hold those thoughts and those things that come up as you're listening, and then we'll hopefully have a conversation. I'd like to think of it more as a conversation, not a Q&A, because that's for me how it feels. that's what I'd love to do. So, starting with you, Giles, and thank you so much for this wonderful space. And anyone who's read Giles's book, anyone read Giles's book here?
Lots.
Good.
That means you won't sell
So
very
about
many.
half and half. So not too many spoilers for those who haven't read it yet, but you will get a beautiful kind of weaving through the whole thing of this space and where it sits in London and the history and the challenges and all of that. So Giles, why don't you give us a kind of sense of how this book came about and the themes and, I'd say, not too many spoilers, but just enough for those who haven't bought it to buy it.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
And maybe a reading as well, if you're feeling really up for it.
Okay, thank you, Julie, so much. It's not in the final. I'm not sure what I was doing when I started writing this, to be honest, and I wasn't sure what shape it would take at the end. I wasn't even sure it was going to be published or publishable. But it started off really as telling the story of this place. That was my original intention. I came here in 2009, and by about 2015, I thought, there are some good things going on here, and I think we need to try and remember them. By then, a lot of the things which already happened. And I think I just sort of started to write because I thought it was a story that needed telling. And the reason I thought it was a story that needed telling was because here we are, a church that has been here for 200 years next month, or the month after next. And it's been through all sorts of different changes. But it's still trying to represent something about God, something about spirituality, something about hope, and something about generosity. And we were trying to build a community of hope and generosity. And so from initially the idea that I would tell the story of what was happening, I thought, well, we also need a bit of background. So we need a bit of explanation. And I was particularly interested in why the church has become so marginal in society over the past kind of 40 or 50 years. And so I wrote a lot of theology, really. And I thought, well, we have to, in order to work out why that's happened, we have to go right back. So the theology sort of started in the 13th century with people like Test and various other people who they were kind of initial scientists. And then it took us through the Enlightenment, and then it took us through the Industrial Revolution and all that. So the book got longer and longer and longer. I think it was up to about 120,000 words by then, but I still had no idea whether it was going to be published. And then at the same time, I began to feel like my own story was also very much part of this as well. And, here I am, a kind of, now a elderly man living in London in 2024, but I've been through quite a journey myself, and part of the journey was here at St. John's, Waterloo, but some of it was before. And I thought, particularly in my role as a vicar, it's good if people know that it's not all completely plain sailing and that it's not absolutely straightforward and that, we also have our struggles and we also have to, I think people realize that, but sometimes it's good to know that, I recognize that everyone is on a journey. We're all on a journey, and this is my journey. And it felt like the journey that I was writing, that I had sort of paralleled in a way the journey of the building, and in a funny sort of way connected to the church. And there was also the question, the kind of deep question of why I'm still in the church as a gay man. I'd done a lot of activism around LGBT issues, and I began to do activism around climate, which we'll talk about a bit more soon. And, there were many moments when I kind of said to me, why are you still there? Why does it still matter? Why have you hung on in there? And I wanted to kind of answer that as well. So there were a whole combination of things, really, that began to emerge. And the book got longer and longer and longer until it was up to about 150,000 words, I think, altogether, which is basically 3 times as long as this. It's probably, I don't know how long yours is, but I don't think it's 150,000, is it? And eventually, I kind of thought, let's try and do something with it. And Shannon had suggested to me a few years previously that it might be a good idea to structure it around the Christian year, because that might give it a bit of structure. So I tried to, but it was a bit all over the place. So I then discovered that there is something called the Writers and Artists Association, and they have editors, and you pay someone to basically go through the book and give you an edit, which she did, which was really helpful. She was called Kylie, and I paid her. I had a very long report on how it might be better. So I took most of her suggestions on board, and then I sent it back to her, paid her another £800, And she came back with a few more suggestions. And one of the suggestions was to make it shorter. And she kind of said, it's like there are 3 different books here, or 2 different books here. And she sort of said the theology stuff is a bit boring, but she didn't actually say that. But she led me to think it might.
When you're going to publish the bit that you cut out, that's your second book.
That comes later. Yeah. She said it's a bit boring, so I cut out quite a lot of it and went down to 90,000 words. And then I said to the publishers who published my first book, to Christine Smith at Canterbury Press, and she came back and she said, it's very good, but there's too much theology, just tell the story and bring it down to 60,000. So what you now see is a kind of winnowing of that, with all the theology elsewhere, but I do have a contract for another book. But it basically tells the story of here, winding it in with my story. So it's a kind of religious, spiritual memoir, I suppose. But the reason I did it is because I think spirituality really matters. And I think sometimes there's kind of fear of it, and people don't really understand it. People don't really understand religion. It's seen as something quite alien, and I was trying to kind of, in a way, ground it in my own experience.
Would you like to read something from it?
I would. I had a bit of a problem choosing which bit. And I thought in the end I would read a bit about Extinction Rebellion because of our connection, Jonathan and mine, through climate. And I'm going to read a bit about when Extinction Rebellion came during their first rebellion, which was back in 2019, I think. There came a particular Holy Week when Extinction Rebellion came to St. John's and the parish was touched by stardust. Wispy people emerged like a shoal of sticklebacks. They wanted to create a new vision, sharing and dreaming. There was a concatenation. 2 worlds collided. The boundaries blurred. Police, church, establishment, anarchy. Working for a different way, more consensual. This is a fresh expression of activism. I was caught up in it. There was something magical about Extinction Rebellion that first time. The crypt became a beautiful place. The police intervened like stag beetles in a float of butterflies. A little magic happened in the crypt. Artworks, music, later the Red Rebels, their stark white faces and blood-red robes, walking, walking, walking. Conversation light but intense. They were around the place, which seemed to lift the veil to another world. This is what we're dreaming of. This is how we can make it happen. An email had arrived first, perhaps mid-February. Dear Giles, I'm working with XR. They're planning a major action in central London, and they're looking for places of safety where they can sleep and store stuff. Can you help? It took only an instant to decide. Of course we could. We had, then, an empty crypt, long, damp, chilly, vacant. They could have a key to the crypt door. I replied, and Helen passed my details on to a young man called Tom, who came to visit. Tom was the harbinger of the new arrivals, like the spies Joshua sent into Canaan. Incipient beard, softly spoken, polite, clad in elfin robes. That last bit is not true, but he might just as well have been. I showed him the damp bit of the crypt, the former air raid shelter. It was smelly and unprepossessing, but his eyes lit up when he saw it. And when there'd be a kitchen available with unlimited hot water, and there would be toilets and, wonder of wonders, showers, he was on fire.
Oh, you can see. Great. I mean, it's so beautifully written. And I just want to say, I started reading it on a plane to Morocco last month, much to the annoyance, I think, of my family. Because, when you're with the family and then you start reading the book, and I got so into it, I kept reading it and then finished it when I was there. And like any book of a story of someone's life, you find bits of your own life when you're not expecting it. And I found myself, in many ways we're very different. Your life was very different to mine. But actually so many bits of it took me right back to childhood, to things that happened to me that I'd kind of forgotten about. So honestly, beautifully kind of done, and, takes you on this wonderful journey of so much, which I've never had yellow trousers, though, by the way.
Right.
So, but,
try it.
I might try them one day. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, you need to read the book. So, Jonathan, I'm still reading yours. I'm on Exodus, And you're in some ways, and actually there's similarities also. And it's much more of a, well, you'll explain it, but I really felt and feel very moved by it, learning a lot. I thought I would find it more confusing than I have. It's, you know, for me as a Muslim, it feels like a very sacred thing to do and something that we're told we have to do, which is to understand previous scriptures. And so for me, this journey is one of learning also. So I feel very grateful to you for that, because the way you weave things together again is honestly stunning. So, you know, really thank God literally for this book. But tell us a bit about your kind of journey with it and why and how, and a reading if you're up for that as well.
I'll do my best. First of all, can I just say I appreciated every thoughtful word that you so kindly said in your introduction. At these difficult times, how important it is to be together, how we harbour different aspects of grief and hope in our hearts, and how it matters to be able to share whatever our views of the world. And you put that so beautifully. I really appreciate it. And there's so many connections and differences I have with your book, and I'm looking forward to sort of talking about that as well. And each time I look at it, something different I relate to in a different way jumps out at me. And I just mentioned one thing, that page where you don't want to get up in the morning. It's 5 a.m. and your partner says, you have to, you're the vicar. Yeah, you know, you have to, you're the rabbi. Yeah, you know, can't quite face it today, but somebody gives you a kick and says, go on in there.
Go on and get there.
And then it's all right.
Yeah.
And you have the blessing of the people around you. So I guess I've spent my life, I've been, perhaps unusually, I've been in the same community all my working life, which will be over 40. And I've spent my life thinking about these texts, and that's the Jewish tradition. It's an interpretive tradition. You weave now around the sacred text of the Hebrew Bible, the books of Moses, and in so doing, you also interact with all the people who've done the same for 2,500 years. And that's its riches and its challenge. And I spent my life doing that. And this was a godsend during lockdown. I do most of my writing early in the morning, because once I've switched on the emails, I can't really concentrate properly on anything. So, and it kept me sane, sane. And I find it both deeply challenged by and love the process of writing. And it structured itself. Because a bit like you say, the Christian year, the Jewish year, this is the lectionary. And the only thing I had caution about it was I very much wanted to write not just for Jewish readers, but for Christian readers, particularly because we share the same Bible, but also for readers of other faiths. And so I put in a thematic index, so you don't have to sort of plow your way for, does he talk about this anywhere? You've got some sort of guide. I was also aware, I hope it's okay to say that my experience of Jewish-Christian dialogue is that often Christians are very, very knowledgeable about the words of the Bible. It's been read and read and read, but not about how Jews read the Bible. That we, through the eyes of the sages, and that actually Judaism is not the religion of the Bible. It's the religion of how the rabbis read and taught the Bible. And I wanted to try to communicate that. And I wanted to weave in things I'm passionate about. The environment, animals, nature, care for people. I'm very touched in that scene. I looked at it together where this woman comes and says, this mum came in, you know, her child was dead of meningitis within 3 hours and comes to you and there's nothing you can say. So those were the themes. It's the kind of, the try to weave the then of the text with the now of the heart was what I was engaged in. You asked before if we would read things. I want to choose two very short bits, and both near the beginning, because they were about, very near the beginning, I wanted to put who I was writing for. And I put there, I'm mindful of Abraham Joshua Heschel. He's one of the great rabbis of the 20th century, roots in Poland, the Jewish mystical world, and then fled to America and in a way translated that tradition of Eastern European mysticism into English. I'm mindful of Abraham Joshua Heschel's pithy definition in his 1963 speech, Religion and Race. What is an idol? Any God who is mine but not yours. Any God concerned with me but not with you is an idol. I've never thought of God as God of the Jews, but always as the God of us all, encompassing and transcending all differences and divisions. God speaks in all life. God is present in the bird's song and the meditation of the trees, as much as, to quote Wordsworth, in the still, sad music of humanity. Religions are different paths to the same goal of service. What matters most are not our divergences in ritual and dogma, important as they are, but the kinds of people we become as we try to follow the path of faith and care for each other and all living beings. And then I come back to this theme because I felt it was very important to not evade some of the big theological challenges. And I'm coming a place of deep engagement, but also critical engagement with my own tradition. And one of the key questions, what do I mean when I say God? And I wrote fairly frankly about that right at the beginning, even despite some people's objections, quoting Richard Dawkins. And I'll just read this little bit here. But God, as the Jewish mystical tradition makes especially clear, is only a name, a word in human language for that which transcends all names and all language, the ineffable, unfathomable source of all. God, the one and only deity, is unknowable by the very fact of being named within the confines of our imagination and speech. We must therefore be constantly aware that whatever we say about God is always an imposition. It does not and cannot describe God as God truly is, because our account is ineluctably colored by the limitations and presumptions of our understanding. The ultimate reality lies always beyond, in the realms of the indescribable.
Ooh. You can see what I mean. These, just wonderful books, both of them. So why don't you say a bit about each other's books? Jonathan, you start. How was Giles's book for you? And then Giles, how was Jonathan's book for you?
So I really appreciated this book. You sent it me I printed it out on A4, and it took me a while to get into it. But the first thing I wanted to say is it's a really courageous book. And I really respect that and I admire that. It was not your route into the church, your route as a gay man, fronting different battles that had and won, probably still are not, but nothing like to the extent now. And you do that with a combination of honesty and courage that I've really carried me, and I really, really admire. And that was, I think, perhaps one of the most important things about it. Another thing which really struck me is you relate it to here. And there are things about it which are so different in many ways. The rootedness in place, your reference to the mud flats of the Thames, the call of curlews, which I've heard for the first time not long ago, which are wonderful. And the rootedness of 200 years of history and place, which the Jews have. I'm the first member of my family, except for my children, born in this country, in Scotland, well, more or less this country. My parents were refugees, and the Jewish community is we're always thinking of another place while being here, and sometimes that complexity is enriching, and sometimes it's discordant. And that sense of here really moved me. And then also the fact that so many people from different backgrounds and leading different lives come to St. John's, and how sometimes challenging but always rich that is. And that really took me as well. So there's some of the things of books that I really, really appreciated and was touched by.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I just want to say that our architect is, raise your hand, sorry. Sorry to put you on the spot, but Eric designed all of this. And made
Oh,
it
it's
happen.
fantastic.
Which is
I was
amazing.
also taken by the 2 lines you got after all that work to get planning permission, saying,
Oh my
we will
God.
make no exceptions in this case. And we also went through, we've rebuilt 13 years ago, and the whole planning thing took at least 5 years. And we were turned down the first time.
All right.
So,
it's another shared
yeah.
experience.
So when I was reading that part where we're wondering if the planning permission is going to come and that 60-page PDF or whatever it was,
Yeah.
and I was kind of thinking,
Yeah.
please say yes, and of course, like, oh.
Yeah.
Anyway, no spoilers.
There we are.
You're in this wonderful
here.
place now, so we know it all was all right in the end.
Yeah.
But that was painful, that bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for those really generous words, and ditto. Really, I'm also in Exodus.
Wow.
So
We're in Exodus
and
together then.
You have said many times that it's not good to read it all
It's
the way
not
through.
a book
but,
to read through. No.
But it is a book to read through, actually, because it's incredibly rich, and I'm absolutely loving it. And what you say about Christians knowing the Bible but not understanding, how Jewish people read and interpret the Bible is absolutely 100% spot on. Because what I really love about this book is the richness of it and the way in which you bring all of the wisdom of the centuries to bear. It's like there is a kind of whole community encapsulated in what you're writing, and you talk about the different rabbis and the different people. And what's it called? The reflection on the Torah.
So, yeah.
Go on. What's the word?
Interpretation, exegesis.
Yeah, I can't remember. There's another word.
in Hebrew, yeah.
Anyway, the richness of the interpretation. And that means that the peoples come to life in an extraordinary way. And I love the way in which, we feel that we know the characters better. So I've read the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel 1,000,000 times. But I've never realized that after Jacob wrestles, we don't hear of him again until his death. And the way that you kind of unpack that encounter between Jacob and the man at the ford of Jabbok is so extraordinarily rich and brings a whole new level of understanding to me. And ditto, Sarah and Abraham's relationship with Sarah and the way that people have reflected on it. There's maybe one word in the scriptures which has been used to kind of open up a whole thing. And so Sarah becomes a real character as well. And I love that sense in which each of them are part of the family, they're part of the history and part of the story, and they're part of your story. And they're part of the whole story of Israel. And so it's extraordinarily kind of rich, really. The first time we met, I think, was when you spoke here at the launch of Faith for the Climate.
Yes.
And I remember that was back in 2014. And I remember being kind of blown away by the wisdom then, but it's very much present in here as well. And also the kind of generosity of it as well. And the fact that you wrote this for all of us is really hugely appreciated. And I hope that people do read it and understand the kind of depth and breadth of things which are going on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Why don't you say a bit more about the way you met and that kind of the work around faith in the climate? Because both books touch on it in really beautiful ways as well. So, Jonathan, why don't you say a bit about
I also should know that Naomi Verber came in with just at the start, who's the executive director of Eco-Judaism. So the links between, and it's, when talking politics is difficult, coming together against racism, coming together for the climate, for biodiversity, is a way in which we can be together, and a very important one. And I've been in 2 or 3 of the actions that we've done together, and I've appreciated your leadership, particularly I was involved in COP26 in Glasgow, together with you and people from other faiths, and that was very special. But also, several things here last year and the year before, and I look forwards to the urgency. The urgency of being together from now onwards is really important. There was a very, very interesting moment, actually, written about, but since this book, we were outside, was it Lloyd's Insurers?
Yeah.
Just 10 of us in a silent vigil. Yeah. Jews and silence is not the best combination, but this was a Quaker silence, 10 minutes, during which there were only 10 of us with a banner, and this gentleman walks past, a city gentleman, and says, "Hypocrites, all of you, look at the plastic you're wearing, look at your plastic banner." And it gave me a lot of thought, and I actually mentioned it in a high holiday New Year sermon almost exactly a year ago. And somebody in the front row said, "Not that quietly. Quite right too," which was reported back to me by my son, to whom he was unfortunate to be sitting next to. And I thought, actually, not hypocrites, but implicated. Really implicated. And I think it's that struggle with being implicated in a way of life which treats the world and many other people in a way which I definitely don't believe in and don't want to be part of, which brings us together and which is so hard.
Yeah.
Giles, why don't you just say a bit about the faith and what you're doing?
Absolutely, no. And because I got involved in climate really because of the stories in the book. So if you haven't read it, I won't repeat it now. But she's known to some people here. Siobhan Grimes challenged me about some money that we took from Shell. And as a result of that, I began to get involved in climate. And I realized back in about 2013 that there wasn't really a place where people concerned about climate from across faith traditions could come together, really, and talk about it. And it just seemed to me that it was a complete no-brainer, because we're all, nearly every religious tradition puts creation or the cosmos at the heart of everything, and care for the cosmos and care for the creation. And it seemed to me that this was a way in which we could work together across faiths, despite our differences. And also, we needed a louder voice. And this was back in 2013, 2014, when people were struggling to get the climate voice heard, as we still are. And it was running up to Paris, 2015. COP16, as it then was in Paris in 2015. So we had a gathering here, and I think about 40 or 50 of us came. And out of that climate, some of you were here. It's good to see you again. And we've done all sorts of things, really. We helped to organize the pilgrimage to Paris, which was quite important back in 2015. And since then, we've become increasingly focused on climate justice, as well as the director of Eco-Judaism. We also have the director of Faith for the Climate here. Shannon, can you wave? and Shannon, and particularly the Quakers, sorry, this isn't to kind of name people, but Paul Parker from the Quakers. And the Quakers have been really helpful in kind of helping us to focus on justice and the connections between climate and justice, and the recognition that the people who've done least to cause the climate crisis are suffering most. And so we've tried over and over again to bring our witness of justice to the climate struggle, as well as our concern about biodiversity. So we have demonstrated outside Lloyd's. We've been on 1 million marches. We've used that banner many times. We've now lost it, the plastic banner, so it's gone. But it was reused a lot of times. And we've just tried to make sure that, the voice is heard and is raised. And the voice, because, structural change is necessary change. And we try to push at the structures as well as encouraging people to make their own changes. But it's very moving. You can sit in a room with a Jew and a Christian and a Muslim and a Hindu and a Buddhist and a pagan, and we're all just getting on with it and trying to make a difference, which is wonderful, really.
Yeah, no, and thank you all both for what you're doing. I was listening to the How to Fail podcast a couple of days ago with Siddiqi Khan. I don't know if any of you have listened to the How to Fail podcast, but essentially Elizabeth Day asks the guests to choose their 3 failures. And Siddiqi Khan, one of his failures that he chose and spoke about was how late he was to come to the realization about the environment and the work and the impact of the death of Eden from, the first person that had been named as dying from pollution, and it had a massive impact on him. And I really appreciated him for saying that also, because as you say, it's a journey. None of us have arrived. We've all still got so much to do. We're all still wasting so many things. So it's a journey, isn't it? And but thank you both for being part of that. So Giles, just coming back to your book, it's fair to say that it's written in a very honest, raw way. The sex, drugs, and rock and roll stuff. No spoilers, but you do need to read it. You really kind of chose to do it in that way, and I just wondered. I'm thankful that you did, because it's really, as Jonathan said, it feels very important to hear it in that way. But it's you're really putting yourself out there. Why did you do it that way? Was that a conscious thing? Did it just happen? What kind of? How was that? I
realised what I was doing, to be honest. That's the story of my life, really. I think, we'll do this. And then afterwards, you discover that there are consequences. It's too late by then. And then you have to work out how to kind of respond. in this case, there have been no consequences so far, touch wood. I thought there might be pushback either from the hierarchy or from people who are on the more conservative wing of the church. I haven't heard a single word except people have said it's very brave. I wasn't trying to be brave, really. I was just telling my story. And, if I was going to tell the story honestly, it needed to, it needed to have those things. I've always thought, you can't really be a minister or a priest if you're not prepared to be open when appropriate. That doesn't mean that, every single sermon I talk about, what I did last week. But it's important that, we're all called to be honest before the divine and to be open before the divine. And if that's the case, then we also need to be open with one another. Otherwise, we can't have real relationships. So in a sense, it was a kind of invitation to others to go into a relationship, both with the divine and with me. And I just say, the journey is complicated for everyone, and my journey was complicated, and it was particularly complicated because on the one hand, you have the Church of England and needing to move on, and on the other hand, you have, gay London in the 1980s, and for a long time I tried to have a foot in both camps, and gradually, it's come together. There's still work to do, but I wanted to be honest about the complexity of the journey, and we're all on, we've all got those kind of complexities about, bringing together the different parts of ourselves and how we perceive ourselves and how others perceive us and how we're perceived by God. Yeah, and I thought it just had to be told, really.
Yeah, it's amazing. And thank you for doing it in that way, because of course what it does when someone else is honest makes us all remember that we all have the messiness and we're kind of hiding it or masking it, and actually it is brave, but it's very generous as well, because it makes you realise that we all need to be honest with ourselves and also with others, and just drop the masks a bit,
Can I say two more things very quickly? I think the other thing is that, I thought because of all the, within the Church of England, the LGBT people, we're all supposed to be kind of perfect, we all have to be very good, and we're all in monogamous relationships, and we're not doing anything else, we're all, so please let us in. And I kind of wanted to say, actually, it's not necessarily like that. We've all got complicated pasts. I remember there was one event as part of Living in Love and Faith where I was talking to a lot of bishops, and we all shared our life stories, and you could kind of see their eyes getting bigger and bigger as I told mine compared with theirs. But I thought it was important to be there, me, so that's part of it. And the other thing is, just to acknowledge Shannon's part in all of this as well, because, who's been so very, very important in my journey and has helped so much to happen. So I couldn't say all that without mentioning you, so thank you, Shannon.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because when I was reading it, I was thinking, where's Shannon? Come on. When's he going to come in? I can't remember what page it is, but it's like, and then when he came in, thank goodness for that. I was wondering, where's he going to, I know at the beginning, but I mean, in terms of the story, where's the kind of, so, but, so Jonathan, just going back to the theme and drawing out a bit more, so for me, one of the things that really strikes me about Jews is that grappling, that kind of throwing the text around and picking it open and thinking about it. And I think what you do, and it always strikes me, Muslims are also meant to do that, but we don't do it in the same sort of way. People tend to learn things either by heart or, there isn't, I guess, maybe sometimes the confidence to grapple with it in the same sort of way and question it and throw it up in the air and talk about it with each other and all of that. And it's so important that we do that. And honestly, in this book, you do it. And so that's what I think mostly really enjoyed about it. Looking at it in a critical way from the past, also bringing into the present. And actually, on that point, I want to read something from this book now, if I can find it. Page 70. So you touched already, Giles, on the beautiful story of Jacob and Joseph and all of the wonderful, and in the Quran, actually there's a chapter which goes into a lot of detail about the story of Joseph or Yusuf in Arabic, and it's a wonderful, it never gets boring. But just reading from here to give a sense of how you've been able to weave in the sort of the teachings plus how it applies now is really wonderful. Actually, let me just put my glasses on because I'm at that point. Oh, I haven't got them. It's fine. I can read. I'll give it a go. So as for us, do we too go through life wearing the garments others have dressed us in, or, if we are fortunate, we ourselves have chosen, in order to protect our raw centre, which still longs for our father or mother? Endowed with the capacity for love and trust, we garb ourselves and each other in expectations and disappointments that cling to us as intimately as our... Perhaps we, like Joseph, struggle to find and to be found by our brothers and sisters, partners and children, and in the midst of life's turmoil, sometimes lose not only them, but also our true selves. I mean, you know, using that wonderful story and then bringing that right here to us individually now. I mean, you know, it's just there's so many examples like that. How important is that? I mean, that is the essence of it, I guess. As you've said, you've been studying this all of your life. You know, how to make it relatable. And for us all, as with scriptures that are very old, how do we apply them to now while still holding on to the essence of it? I mean, what's your sense of all of that?
It's always, I mean, one struggling with the texts, I think, always. Can I just relate to something you said just before coming to your journey? And it made me wonder, and I was sort of looking again at your book, preparing for tonight, and thinking that, is it often in our spiritual journeys that it's something outside the norm, outside the orthodox, that actually pushes us into the place that we have to be? If I think of some of the encounters I had, which made me deepen my own relationship with Judaism, they actually came from far outside Judaism. And they made me go back to my own roots. And they were unexpected. And I just wonder whether that's that interaction between the conventional path and the things which are well off it can be so important to our own spirituality and our finding ourselves. And that's so well expressed in your book. It really touched me. Yeah.
Just on that, I think I've been having a couple of conversations with people about prophecy, as in the prophetic, which doesn't necessarily mean, you know, foretelling the future. It's more kind of telling the truth into a situation. And the prophets does, aren't they? In the Hebrew scriptures and subsequently. They're people who've had experience of being, as you say, different, and then trying to speak into the center. Think of Amos, who was a vine dresser, wasn't he? And many others. And then people like David was the youngest son, wasn't he? So it is very much, you know, often it's the outsiders which push you to think differently, don't they?
And most of them come to a bad end as well. They remain.
That's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, people don't want to. People don't want to hear.
So, what do you hope that people will get from your book, Jonathan?
First, I hope the different themes will touch. And I also hope that in the mystical tradition, the text of the Torah is not the way we frame it as narratives, stories and laws, with each sentence with its grammar and syntax. The most radical says it's white fire upon black fire. The words kind of have plasticity to them. They're God's message. And you have to abide within certain rules of tradition in interpreting them, but they become plastic. You can play with them, would be a little bit too careless, but you can work with them, you can shape with them like a potter shapes the clay. And this is a constant process. And my favorite aspects of Jewish tradition are midrash, which means, the word really means searching. And you're looking, where are the gaps? What's this story not told me? And a great gap in the story is a wonderful opportunity. And then the Hasidic tradition, which is, you know, I don't care about grammar. I don't care if the word's spelled. I'll read it this way. Or I'll rephrase the sense. I mean, it's a beautiful one I've been thinking about today and yesterday. Questions have come up. What's prayer? There's this scene where after the golden calf and all the sins, God comes down to Moses, who's gone back up the mountain and fasted again for 40 days and 40 nights. And God calls out to Moses, God, God, merciful and gracious. It's like the chorus line of forgiveness. And over this period of the year, we say that line again and again and again and again. But the rabbi known as the Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto, Kalonymus Kamen Shapira, he buried his writings in the ghetto, and he survived till 43. But before that, he read this verse just differently. He says it's not God comes down to Moses and God over there calls to Moses, describing God's self as God, God. No, he says, the God within us, when we are aware of the sacred in our lives, calls out to the God beyond. And when that happens, that's prayer. And it just seems such a beautiful way to rephrase it. And there's kind of this wonder and magic in the texts and stories that we inherit, that possibility and creativity to come across, as well as the particular examples that have spoken to me.
Giles, how about you? What would you like people to take from your book?
Well, kind of what he said, really.
I agree with everything my right honourable friend just said. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I mean, seriously. Okay, massive generalisation now, and you can pull me up if you like, but, I think there is a real spiritual hunger at the moment.
Yes.
And I think it's a bit lost. So there's a lot of kind of pick and mix spirituality and all that stuff. And I'm sure it's good for some people, and I'm glad, that they find something. But I think what I deeply regret is that the richness of the tradition that Jonathan's just described so beautifully is not given sufficient attention. I'm really interested in the mystical tradition at the moment, and you've touched on that yourself. I'm very interested in the kind of 13th century Christian mystics. Hardly talked about Islam at all. There's a wonderful, fantastically rich tradition, the Sufi tradition of Islamic mysticism. And you read whoever, Ibn Arabi, had to get him in, sorry, I get told off for dropping names, but Ibn Arabi or someone, and you realise that, you couldn't really put a cigarette paper between what he's saying and what Meister Eckhart is saying and what some of the great Jewish mystics are saying. And I want people to kind of understand and investigate the richness of that tradition. So I want them to kind of get over the barrier of seeing the Church of England as, A, corrupt, B, homophobic, C, misogynist, and all of the above. And, you can level all those accusations at the church, but I want people to get past that and to see that it's also a place of discovery and where people can become more truly the people that they're called to be. And that's really what the book is about. And it's about love. If people can learn, we all need to learn how to love better. Yeah. And if this can help in any way, then I think it's done its job.
Wonderful.
The love of life and the love of tradition are in both our books, I think. Yeah.
So why don't we open it up for comments and thoughts and you have what's come to you from this wonderful exchange between these wonderful people and authors. Anyone would like to go? Oh, we've got a mic.
Got a mic. Thank
Shannon.
you very much. Yeah,
straight up with the hand.
No.
Yeah, okay, it's on. Thank you so much. This is so moving. I'm not biased at all because I don't know any of you. But this is just thank you for this lovely, lovely conversation. But my question is specifically for Jonathan, because a bit of background. Two people who really shaped my view of spirituality and activism and justice come from the American Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King Jr. For very different reasons, I'm inspired by both of them. And it is through Martin Luther King who hugely revered the prophets. I think one of his favorite quotes is from the book of Micah. But it's through him that I learned about Rabbi Heschel. And Rabbi Heschel is someone I find myself quoting to this day. Like one of his quotes I chose for the Faith for the Climate website now, few are guilty, but all are responsible. And I think he also marched with Martin Luther King at Selma. And he said something like, I had to check the quote, but something like, legs are not lips, king is not kneeling, but when I was marching at Selma with Martin, I was praying with my feet. Yes.
Yes.
So this is someone who, you know, I've put in this pantheon of teachers and sages and saints, you know, along with Thich Nhat Hanh and so on, who are all friends of Martin. But, I mean, hearing you speak tonight, it's the first time I've twigged the connection between mysticism and social justice. You know, we sort of think of mysticism as something, you know, it's abstract, it's airy-fairy, it's all these people who did it in the past. But in Rabbi Heschel, I mean, in your telling, this is a mysticism that informed a very concrete, real commitment to social justice. And I just wanted to hear more about that. I just wanted to hear more about Rabbi Heschel's legacy and how this tradition lives through him and how it inspires you. I wonder if you could say a bit more about that.
I'd be glad to. First of all, I think it's very wrong of you not to be biased. I think you ought to be. Thank you, and thank you also for your welcome here also, Shannon, which I appreciate. So Abraham Joshua Heschel's daughter, who's herself a professor of Jewish philosophy, collected his essays after he died and entitled the volume Moral Grandeur and Spiritual Audacity. Maybe the other way around, moral audacity. But the two of them really go together, because I think what the mystical tradition does is bring a profound sense of wonder which connects us with all life. And if one feels connected with all life, why is one not standing up for all life? Martin Luther King invited Abraham Joshua Heschel to stand, and you can see the pictures, next to him in the front row. They marched arm in arm at Selma, Alabama. And you were right, when he came in and was asked, what were you doing there? He said, I was praying with my legs. But he writes very interestingly about what made him an activist, which came late in his life. He was not actually that well received in America in many ways initially. His teachings within the colleges where he taught, he was not a methodical teacher, so it was hard for him. But he wrote why. He said, the indifference to evil is worse than evil itself. I realized that I was not at liberty to live a life of quiet and tranquility while this was going on in the world. And the Hebrew prophets on which he wrote his doctorate motivated me to be out there and speak out. And I remember writing to his daughter when Trump was elected and said, what would your father be doing? Pacing up and down, hopelessly, restlessly, full of disbelief that this kind of racism could have returned to the world. He would not know what to do within his own skin. And so I think there's a close allyship, actually, between the core of the mystical tradition and activism. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Quintin's got a question.
Quintin?
Thank you very much. I was just wondering, in today's world, sort of spirituality is seen as almost individual in terms of it in the church. Often that is the way it's seen. How do we, both of your books seem to me, go towards the community and the tradition of the faiths? How do we sort of move the churches or the synagogues or community and society back away from that individual understanding into a more corporate community and traditional wrestling with the texts?
Very good question and a huge challenge. I mean, I think the fact that Jonathan's a rabbi and I'm a vicar kind of gives you the answer. For me, it's very much about starting where you are. So I often say in sermons things, people say you don't have to go to church to be a Christian. Well, I say you do. You know, I say that over and over again because I think it is absolutely part of the community, and that's again why I kind of in this book I interwove that. It's not just about the building; it's also about the people who use it. And you know, in every community there are struggles, and in every community there are disagreements. If you've got 80 people in a congregation, you know, you can do the sums. There's an awful lot of relationships, and you know, therefore there's a lot of potential for them to go wrong, which is why there's often struggle. But it's kind of hanging on in there with the struggle, which makes the difference. And you know, that's true in all of our traditions. That you know, we are wrestling with one another, which is why we have such public arguments, because we sort of can't help it because it's so much to do with our hearts. But you don't give up. And I think the most important thing is to kind of witness the importance of the communities, and also, on a macro level, to witness the importance of faiths working alongside each other. So the kind of global, the bigger community as well as the individual communities. But I think you just have to keep at it, really, and remind people of the tradition all the time, of where we came from and why we're doing what we're doing.
You just give me a great opening line for a sermon over the Jewish high holidays, because I can quote, my Christian colleague said, you do have to come to church to be a Christian, so I can now say. But actually, I think in many respects, one of the things that community is extremely strong in Judaism, and all the troubles of this year have strengthened in many Jewish people the determination to find resilience in community and solidarity, and it's much harder to face troubles when you're on your own. So I think it's been very central. I actually think it's an important question for society as a whole. There's a very interesting dilemma. I was in Scotland for sort of a couple of weeks of holiday when this question of cutting the budget for the environment in order to pay public servants like teachers and doctors more came up, and the Scots blamed the Chancellor for having to deal with this dilemma. But actually, interestingly, public servants and our environment are public goods. And I think for a long time we've rewarded individuality and individual aspiration and achievement at the cost of really appreciating what we depend on as a society. And we need to reorient it quite profoundly towards community and the communitarian, and appreciate people who make our community life possible, whether they belong to faith or whether it is local society that unites us, because we depend on them. And there is something about the trend towards the individual having gone too far and the move towards here together as communities needing to be more stressed.
Thank you. I think there was a hand here.
Hello, thank you. All of your reflections and contributions have been so beautiful, so I'm really pleased to be here. I've often pondered on this thought in terms of mysticism, because if we're looking at mysticism from different religious traditions, it seems to be transcendence beyond transcendence, which is entirely ineffable, the divine which cannot be described in words. So in a way, the telos of that is like the grand union of humanity, which is a very beautiful thing. However, you're both adherents of very distinct traditions. So I'm wondering how you reconcile the existence and the desire to be part of a distinctive community with the highest end of spiritual mysticism.
Very good question.
Do you want me to start on that?
Yes, go on.
It's a very good question. I also just want to say that within the mystical tradition, it's often the sense of the immanence of the sacred that moves me as well as the transcendence. It's, I feel that in terms of relationship with nature, that we've become so anthropocentric, but also in the world of animals, in the world of trees, the presence of the sacred there, often find it particularly palpable and immediate. The experiences I've had on those occasions when I've been to church services, and I've been in mosques, I need to amend that, far less. I've often been very moved, and I felt not that it's taken me somewhere unfamiliar, but that it's taken me in a different idiom to the depths that I recognize in my own tradition as well. So I don't think that particularity needs to lead to separateness. It can lead us down to the place by our particular roots, which is most useful and together. And so I've actually never felt threatened by being in the context of different faiths, but often enriched because I experience something of the language, culture, music of that faith. But it also, perhaps it circumvents the detail of my own faith, which is so distracting. You know, you have the communal arguments and the pettiness, and it takes one to the depths because I'm thinking, I recognize this. And this is how it's expressed in my home. So that's just my personal response to that.
I mean, I think if you go all the way back to kind of cave paintings in 45,000 BCE, there are some questions about what the people were doing with the cave paintings, but it does appear that they were trying to kind of make some connection with the other side, with the indescribable, with the divine. And I think throughout religious history, there's been that sense that, we're dealing with something which is way beyond us. And the Christian mystics, well, all the mystics, describe it as being utterly other and utterly unreachable. And then the question is, well, so how do we reach it then, if it's utterly unreachable? And that's where revelation comes in. And I think the exciting thing about humanity is the kind of breadth and diversity and the way that gradually things have emerged in different parts of the world in different ways. And so people have different understanding of what the revelation is. And some of the revelations are very closely connected. So, you don't need me to say that within the Muslim tradition, the Quran is the great revelation. Within the Christian tradition, it's Jesus. Within the Jewish tradition, it's the law and the Torah, and how that's been understood, I think. But they're all ways of engaging with that which it's impossible to engage with, which is why there are arguments, because of course people understand it differently in things. But the depth of it, as Jonathan says, I share that sense of kind of, when you're in a room with people who are genuinely searching and genuinely seeking and genuinely trying to understand and make sense of this thing which is beyond making sense of, it can be it's enlarging and enriching. Inclusive Mosque is a really good example of that. So it's a recognition that the other is so other that none of us can begin to describe it. And so we all find ways of describing a little tiny bit of it, and we work with that. And I think that's kind of wonderful, really, that it's not the same everywhere.
Mm. Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you. Yep, over here, and one here.
Hi, thank you so much. It's been such a great talk, and so inspiring to. I feel like this is a model for world peace, like what I'm seeing. So thank you so much. My question's about biblical hermeneutics and like a way to approach the Bible. I feel like a lot of the issues we deal with in like specifically Christianity about gay marriage, all these kind of issues, really come down to a question of how to approach the Bible, like whether you think it's perfect, it's the inerrant word of God, like how you approach it basically. And I just want to kind of ask you what your view is about that, how you approach it, and how you think it can create a foundation for our faith communities. Thank you.
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
You'll have to read my next book. Because a lot of that was in here. I think that Christianity kind of started going wrong in about the 14th or 15th century, in a way, in terms of the way it treated scriptures. And by the 17th or 18th century, the damage was really done, because there was this notion that you had to read scripture as, verifiable, and you had to start reading it as the word of God. If you go back to the early fathers, people like Origen, they were wonderful. The way that they inherited the traditions, from Judaism, really. And they would say, well, it says that, but it obviously doesn't mean that. It must mean this. Say, by analogy, if you take this by analogy, then clearly, and so that way they opened up the scriptures in a way that was kind of closed down with the advent of kind of scientific method, really. And biblical inerrancy, it kind of emerged, really, in the 19th century, and has done untold damage ever since. And it's a real shame, really, because it sort of narrows down what the scriptures are. I mean, one of the wonderful things about being here, sometimes on a Sunday, there's a particular passage in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus goes into the synagogue, as was his custom, and he unrolls the scroll, and he reads from the book of the prophet Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim recovery of sight to the blind, peace to the..." whatever it is. It goes on, anyway. And I love standing here and hearing that reading about Jesus reading the book of the prophet Isaiah, because you've got 2024, 33, and 600 BCE all gathered in one moment. And we're all kind of being nourished by the same scriptures and feeding off it. And that's how I treat, the whole of the Bible. It's something that we burrow into and try to understand more deeply. And understand, the overarching point of it all, which is about love and is about justice. So it's, we've got the difficult bits, and then you have to work out, does it really mean that, or are we misunderstanding it?
So the issue that you raise is a huge and has been a very divisive question within Judaism and is to this day. How do I read Torah? First of all, I want to say that a traditional, in inverted commas, orthodox reading of Torah is often quite radical anyway, because the rabbis were prepared to reformulate. I'll give a relatively moderate example. There's a verse in Exodus which says, "Don't follow the majority the many to do evil," from which the rabbis read, "In a vote, follow the majority." You can see what's been cut off from the end and how it's been carved out there, probably because they understood in their time, X hundred years after the text, that actually there was something about democracy particularly among the learned, which mattered. But the argument in the modern period has been quite sharp. It's where my part of Judaism really developed from, which is, do you understand the word of Scripture as literally the word of God? And therefore, and what can you critique and how? And to what extent can you bring sociological, philosophical, literary context to bear on your reading of the Bible? So this has been, I've put it very frankly in the introduction, no text without context. So the way, particularly, for instance, the place of women is understood in the Torah, I think is dependent on socioeconomic realities which don't pertain now, thank God. The same with what Judaism has to say about the Torah's famous quotations on homosexuality. The same with the laws of war. So I think we need historical, critical perspective. But I've also said something else, which in my branch of Judaism is not, I think, adequately stressed, which is you also sometimes need to put off the critical spectacles and let the text guide us. And I think you sort of hinted that earlier on, which is being part of a spiritual tradition, you need to allow yourself to be carried by it and not know, and not stand outside and critique, but be guided, because that's the only path, I think, for it to allow us to grow us spiritually. And yet, one has to also look at the text critically, otherwise it becomes incredibly dangerous. There's plenty we could draw out which would be war cries. The difficulty is knowing when to put the spectacles on and when to put them off.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful.
Anne-Marie had a question.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. My name's Anne-Marie, and I was actually going to say something similar to what the person said before. I think when I came today, I came thinking it was going to be interesting to hear what you had to say, but I feel very moved all the way through this, I have to say. I think it is, I was talking to Giles a couple of days ago, I think God looks down on us here and smiles. It gives whatever we believe God to do great pleasure to see the three of you here discussing. It's just so moving. And one thing I didn't know actually was around the reading of the scriptures in the Jewish tradition. I didn't know that, and I wanted to ask Jonathan. I'm actually a Catholic, I was at Mass this morning in a care home with nuns and old priests, and I know that the Jesuit tradition, I think, reads the Bible in a similar way. I don't know if you've come across that. Maybe not. But from what you're describing, kind of analysing and thinking about how the Scripture relates to us as individuals rather than taking it so literally. So I don't know if that's something you're familiar with, but it's just interesting whether there are those similarities, do you think, between that and what we have in the Catholic faith?
I don't know enough to
Okay.
answer that question properly, but I expect that is likely to be the case because we have similar roots, and because both classic rabbinic tradition and Jesuit tradition share a particular analytic quality with words and with language. So that's something for me to pursue. Thank you.
And I think just kind of, it's about being in relationship, isn't it? So much, we're in relationship with the scriptures, both now, it's us bringing our contemporary understanding to things which were written 2,500 years ago, which were written in love, a lot of them. There's a reason why the canon is what it is. There's a reason why those things are in and other things are out, because they say something profound. So it's about being in that relationship, and that's the same in all the, so many different people have just tried to wrestle with things and understand them, but understand them through the eyes of love, I think.
Yeah, on that note, on the note of love, I think we'll draw this to a close, this part of the evening. I think we can stay for a bit longer. Wonderfully, I wrote down the words, audacity of hope, taken from Barack Obama's book. We heard earlier about, I don't know if I want to mention Donald Trump, but, we've got the debate today. This is all very live, all of this. But I love the fact that he called his book The Audacity of Hope. And I just want to finish reading from your book, this wonderful paragraph about hope. It says, "Hope is different to optimism. This too shall pass. Optimism implies a belief that things will gradually change. Hope implies a belief that, although everything seems like shit," I don't like saying that here, but it's in here.
I wrote it. You can say it.
"Good things will come. Optimism relies on the march of history. Hope is radically discontinuous. The eruptive potential of shared humanity, something to celebrate." So I did want us to leave on a note of hope. And I also feel always, and today again, moved, and for me, it's a very holy place in that sense, that all of us have come here, as I said at the start, in all our messiness, all different, but things that weave all of us together. And, I do think we have something to be very grateful for. I think gratitude is a very holy value. Actually, because we do have a lot to be grateful for, despite all of the things that we're all trying to navigate and grapple with. So I just want to finish by thanking you, Giles, for your vision for this place.
Yes.
And that we're actually sitting in this place in the way that we are. It's testimony to you and your determination that this place would be created in this wonderful way. And I feel, it's a great testimony, and explains it so wonderfully in this book. So thank you for that. Thank all of you for coming. Thank you, Jonathan, for this wonderful book. And honestly, thank both of you for being men of integrity and honesty and, compassion and all the things that we need in leaders that I just feel so missing at times and have done for the last few years in politics and in daily lives. So really, it's genuinely an honour, honestly, to call you friends and to be, in this kind of conversation where we see what I think leadership, honesty is really about. So thank you both. Thank all of you. And I think we're going to have some drinks now.
I hope so.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So can I just very quickly, yes, there are books available on sale,
Oh, yes.
and there's plenty to drink, and there's some crisps and things to fill your stomach. But I just want to thank Julie as well for your wonderful sharing. And for all that you've given us.
Thank you.
So enjoy. We have a rule at St. John's. You've probably heard it many times if you have ever been to St. John's, but you're not allowed to go home until you've spoken to at least 2 people you don't know.
Ooh.
So that's the rule. Okay, enjoy.